Hey, welcome to the Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman. Hey, welcome to the Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman, the show where a cranky middle-aged sports writer, that is 100% me, who's seen it all, takes you behind the scenes and into the stories. I'm your host, Jeff Pearlman. And today, we're diving into a subject that is very, very near and dear to my heart. In fact, it's so near and dear to my heart, but I literally am the only loser in America to own this t-shirt, which I ordered online. And it features former Houston Astros pitcher J.R. Richard, the late J.R. Richard. And back in the late 1970s, when I was a little kid in Mahopac, New York, my first favorite Major League Baseball player was a Houston Astros pitcher, J.R. Richard. And J.R. Richard was just a badass. He was 6'8". The Astros had those really carnival-y orange, yellow, red, white uniforms. He stood on the mound. He struck out a ton of guys. He was just a badass. And when I was a kid, I wrote the Houston Astros a letter by hand saying, Dear Astros, my name is Jeff Pearlman. However, I go by J.R. Pearlman because my favorite baseball player is J.R. Richard. And I would love an autograph from J.R. Richard. And it's actually true. I used to sign my signature in school as J.R. Pearlman because of J.R. Richard. My middle name is Robert. And I never heard anything back. And I was crestfallen because I really believed in J.R. Richard and I believed in the goodness of J.R. Richard. And I have to say, even though I never received a note or a ball or anything from J.R. Richard, I've long found him fascinating and his story both hopeful and heartbreaking. And that's what we're going to delve into today, the rise and ultimate fall of J.R. Richard. All right, so if you are a child of the 2000s, or even a child of the 90s, or maybe even a child of the 80s, there's a decent chance you've never heard of J.R. Richard. You know who Nolan Ryan is. You know probably who Rich Gossage is, Goose Gossage is. You know who Pete Rose is. You know who Mike Schmidt is. But you probably don't know who J.R. Richard is. And to me, that's a real shame. J.R. Richard was a kid out of Ruston, Louisiana. And in 1969, the Astros had the second pick in the amateur draft. Jeff Burroughs went first, and J.R. Richard out of Ruston, Louisiana went second. And J.R. Richard as an amateur prospect this is the way before the age of guys going viral, obviously, but J.R. Richard kind of went viral. He was 6'7". He was crazy athletic. He had 378 as a senior at Lincoln High School in Ruston. He had this game that nowadays would be everywhere, but back then it was somewhere. He's pitching against Jonesboro Jackson High School, and he throws a shutout. He hits 4 home runs on 4 straight at-bats. He drives in 10 runs, and the team wins 48-0. And for the season, J.R. Richard has a 0.00 ERA. His high school career, he goes 21-0. His senior year, he goes 7-0, 89 strikeouts, 43 innings. And he has a bunch of scholarship offers for baseball and basketball. However, the problem is at the time, late 1960s, most of these schools had quotas on black athletes, especially in the South. So a lot of the major powers in Southern baseball weren't touching J.R. Richard because J.R. Richard happened to be a black man or a black teenager at the time. So he winds up being drafted second overall by the Astros, and all these schools in the South, the Auburns and the Alabamas and the LSUs, miss out on this supernova. And he signs with the Astros, $100,000. And J.R. Richard is in the minors, and he struggles because he's insanely wild, but insanely powerful. He throws 97, 98, 99, 100, but he's wild. He hits a lot of batters. He throws a lot of wild pitches. And finally, on September 5th, 1971, late in the season, the Astros aren't contenders. J.R. Richard is called up. And one of the craziest things, I actually just learned researching this, J.R. Richard's first start, I have a newspaper article about this. J.R. Richard played the San Francisco Giants. He struck out 15 in his first major league start, tying a major league record. He struck out Willie Mays 3 times, and Willie Mays actually took himself out of the game late in the game because he didn't want to strike out 4 times against this kid. And that was J.R. Richard at his best. However, over the next bunch of seasons, 72, 73, 74, he's up and down because he's super erratic. One time, he still has a major league record. He threw 6 wild pitches in a game. He hits a lot of batters. If he's on, he's unhittable. And if he's off, he's going to walk 8 or 9 guys. And finally, in 1975, the Astros are like, all right, we're going to keep you. And he goes 12-10 for the Astros. 1976, he goes 20-15. 1977, 18-12. 78, 18-11. 79, 18-13. And J.R. Richard becomes a supernova. Twice in back-to-back seasons, he strikes out 300 guys. Dave Parker of the Pittsburgh Pirates says, when you stand up and you face J.R. Richard, it looks like he's 10 feet tall. Omar Marino, another Pirate, says he's the most terrifying guy in baseball to face. Dusty Baker of the Dodgers says, if there's one guy I don't want to face, it's J.R. Richard. And J.R. Richard becomes this phenomenon of a baseball player. He throws hard. He's nasty. He's the best pitcher in baseball. He loses out on the Cy Young Award 1 year by total BS. The winner was Bruce Sutter, a reliever. It should have been J.R. Richard. And he's just this phenomenon. He's by far the most terrifying guy to face in baseball. But there's one thing that J.R. Richard is going through. And it was very, very common for black athletes back in the day, and especially black athletes in baseball. And if you talk to guys who played, black athletes in particular, who played in the early to mid 1970s, even the late 1970s, you got a lot of this. If you were white and you needed a day off, you were a white guy who needed a day off. If you were white and you were struggling, you were a white guy and you were struggling. If you were a white guy and your arm hurt, they would say, go see the doctor. Your arm hurts. But if you were a black guy, with rare exception, you were maligning. You were lazy. You didn't want it bad enough. You were a malcontent. And J.R. Richard, around this time, started getting the reputation as a malcontent. And now it's 1980, and the Astros are good. And J.R. Richard starts the All-Star game that year. And there's nothing more beautiful. I know a few episodes ago, I talked about Bo Jackson, the All-Star game, Anaheim. J.R. Richard in 1980 starts the All-Star game for the National League at Dodger Stadium, just like with Bo, a beautiful day in Southern California. And there's a moment where he's facing Reggie Jackson. And Reggie Jackson at the time is the guy in baseball, the power slugger, Mr. October, has his own candy bar. And J.R. Richard strikes him out and makes him look like a child. Like Reggie Jackson has never seen heat, command like J.R. Richard. J.R. Richard had a 100-mile-per-hour fastball and a 95-mile-per-hour slider. At his best, he was untouchable. Well, a couple days after the All-Star game, things start going wrong for J.R. Richard. And he's not feeling right. And he starts hearing ringing in his ears, but he doesn't tell anyone. And his arm is feeling heavy. And he's just not there. He's just not feeling it. And J.R. Richard complains to the team doctors. He says, I don't know. I'm not right. And the Astros are basically like, shut up, stop whining, pitch. And he's like, I know, but I don't feel great. I don't feel great. And like, ugh, J.R. Richard is just being a pain in the ass. And there's an article I found from July 15th, 1980. It was a UPI story. And the headline is, What's Wrong with J.R. Richard? And the headline is, the categories in today's What's So Suddenly Wrong with Houston Astros All-Star pitcher J.R. Richard's sweepstakes include his arm, his stomach, and his head. Everyone who places money on the early favorite, his arm, might want to hedge his bet. Richard, who staggered, stumbled, and swooned through a 3 1/3 innings of 1 hit, 4 strikeout, no decision baseball Monday night, later identified his stomach of the culprit, responsible for a stint of short-term ineffectiveness. Sunday, he was pushed back a day in the pitching rotation and identified his right arm as a problem. And then the team doctor said it must be a breakdown in communications. He needs to cut down on his social life. And J.R. Richard was catching a ton of shit in baseball around this time. Teammates were saying, especially white teammates, oh, he's just lazy. Saying to the media, whispering to the media, his attitude sucks. He's just a fucking whiner. He's a complainer. People in the media, especially locally in Houston, J.R. Richard is a whiner. J.R. Richard doesn't want it enough. Here they have Nolan Ryan on the staff, and Nolan Ryan would run through a brick wall for a win. And here's J.R. Richard, and it doesn't seem that great. And J.R. Richard's last start of 1980 is against the Atlanta Braves. And he only goes 3 1/3 innings, and he complains. But then after the game, he's seen in the clubhouse eating fried chicken. And people start questioning his desire. Why are you eating fried chicken after a game? Why are you eating anything after a game? You just complained about your stomach. Why are you being such a bitch? That was actually, honest God, maybe not in that lingo at the time, the number one thing people were asking about J.R. Richard. You are so talented. You are so big. You struck out 300 batters in back-to-back seasons. You started the All-Star game. You made Reggie Jackson look like a fool. And now you're being a little bitch. And what they didn't know is so much more was going on inside J.R. Richard. And we'll get to that next. All right, it's July 30th, 1980, and J.R. Richard is working out at the Astrodome, which at the time was the Astros' home stadium. And if you've ever seen a picture of it, it's actually kind of funny. The Astrodome now looks like a giant sardine can, but back then it was considered like one of the great wonders of the world. But, it was a dome stadium, it was beautiful. And the Astros have an off day, and J.R. Richard is jogging around, and he just doesn't feel right. And he has ringing in his ear, and he's throwing, and all of a sudden he collapses. He just collapses to the ground. And the doctors come running, and he's rushed to Methodist Hospital nearby. And he's diagnosed with a blood clot in his neck, and which is later explained as a stroke. J.R. Richard has suffered a stroke. And it's enormous news all over baseball. J.R. Richard, it wasn't just a stomach ache. It wasn't just him being a whiner. It wasn't just him being another lazy guy in baseball or coded another lazy black ball player in baseball. Something was wrong with J.R. Richard. And J.R. Richard is taken to the hospital. And what's interesting is there were a lot of apologies in the Houston media. And there were a lot of black members of the Houston Astros, guys who played with J.R. Richard, Enos Cabell and Bob Watson, and just different guys who were like, oh, now you realize he wasn't just being lazy. Now you realize he wasn't just being a maligner, because all these people had reduced him to this. And J.R. Richard is in the hospital, and he's getting all these well wishers writing letters and visits. And the Astros are saying, we're praying for J.R. Richard, and we hope J.R. Richard is well, and we love J.R. Richard, and J.R. is the best. And when J.R. Richard starts, he recovers and he comes back and he wakes up and he says his last memory is just collapsing. And then he finds himself in the hospital. At first, he's grateful for the Astros sort of looking out for him. But then he's like, this was kind of bullshit. Like, I told you I wasn't right. And I told you I had ringing in my ears. And I told you my arm wasn't feeling well. And you guys did not believe me. You just didn't believe me. And now here I am in a hospital. And the Astros act as if nothing's happened, right? Oh no, we love you, JR, and it's great. Later that year, he gets out, he throws out a first pitch during a home game during the playoffs. And JR Richard, we love JR. You're going to come back. This is great. And the problem is, JR Richard still looked like JR Richard. He was still big. He was still imposing. But he had suffered a stroke on half of his body. And his comeback, his attempted comeback, was one of the most heartbreaking things you'll ever witness. He didn't pitch again in 1980. He didn't pitch again in 1981, although he would show up at the Astros games in uniform and just kind of stand there, feeling a lot like a loser, actually, like an imposter. You're part of the team, but you're really not part of the team. You're eating the clubhouse spread, but you're not of the clubhouse. And there's nothing worse for a ball player. And I've been around a lot of athletes who are part of the team, but not really part of the team. You're on the Super Bowl sideline, but you're not dressed for the game. Like, you feel great, but you feel like a loser at the same time, like you don't belong there. And that was J.R. Richard. And in 1982, finally, he's making his comeback. And he actually winds up on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the comeback of J.R. Richard. And everyone loves these stories. I'm a sucker for these stories. As a sports writer, there's nothing I love more than a comeback, than a return from the dead. Jim Palmer returning to pitch for the Baltimore Orioles, guys returning and having their last stand. It's a beautiful story. So in 1982, J.R. Richard, his first pitches for Daytona Beach, A-ball with the Astros. And he goes 3-1 with a 2.79 ERA. And it's kind of encouraging. Like, all right, this is not bad. But then he goes up to AAA and he just gets his ass kicked. He's 3-3 for Tucson with a 6.78 ERA. And the Astros call him up late in the season and he really wants to pitch, but they know he can't. He doesn't have it anymore. You can already see he does not have it anymore. If you have a 6.78 ERA at AAA, you're not J.R. Richard anymore. And in 1983, he gives one last shot at it. And he pitches for the rookie league Astros. And he goes 2-3 with a 3.18 ERA. But he just doesn't have it. He's not striking out guys anymore. He's not intimidating anyone anymore. And the worst part of it all is you're seeing like 19-year-old kids lighting up J.R. Richard. And there's nothing more sad than seeing your hero get lit up by guys who are not 1/100th of your hero. And later on in 1983, the Houston Astros release J.R. Richard. And you might think like, wow, that's a sad ending. Like J.R. Richard is released, but it got so much worse. J.R. Richard suffered a divorce where he lost a lot of money. He got involved in a bunch of businesses, invested in a bunch of businesses, and they all went bad. He was not a businessman. He was not a savvy guy, actually. He was kind of a simple guy from nowhere, Louisiana, who just happened to find fame. And by the mid-1990s, J.R. Richard, arguably the greatest Astro of all time till that point, is living under a bridge in Houston. And he's 6'7", and by now he weighs about 400 pounds, and he's enormous, and he's homeless, and he's living under a bridge. And the Astros know he's living there, and they don't do shit for him. And former teammates know he's living there, and they don't do shit for him. And finally, some charities kind of uncovered J.R. Richard, and he's taken in, and he's cared for, and he starts getting involved in Christian ministries, and he kind of finds his footing, and he winds up writing a book and all that stuff. But he realizes something. He realizes that he has been forgotten by the team that he carried on his back. He realized that he's been forgotten by the team that didn't believe him when he said, I'm sick, I'm not feeling well, something is wrong with me. They ignored him. They had nothing to do with him. And for the rest of his life, J.R. Richard carried that bitterness with him, truly. And he wound up dying in 2021 at age 71. And to me, the story of J.R. Richard is legitimately heartbreaking. And what pisses me off, and I say this sincerely, and I've written about this, the Houston Astros have retired a lot of numbers, and they have never retired the number of J.R. Richard. And J.R. Richard, you can still make the argument, is the greatest pitcher in Astros history. And the reason they didn't retire his number, I strongly believe, is because he had the audacity to call this organization out and to say, where were you when I needed you? Why didn't you believe me when I was telling you this? And even if they retire his number tomorrow, which they won't, it's far too late because he's gone. And the one thing I have in my life that I'm really happy about, and this all happened because of TikTok and because of the show, is I was talking one point about my love of J.R. Richard. This is a while ago in a TikTok video, actually. I was talking about my love of J.R. Richard, and someone wrote me and said, oh, you know, I have a baseball, I don't even care about it anymore, that I got, and a bunch of the Astros signed it. And he sent me this ball right here. And it says, game ball, home run, I think 1979. And among the signatures on this ball, we have Bill Verdon, the former Red Sox manager. We have Enos Cabell. And right there, in black marker, we have J.R. Richard, my favorite baseball player when I was a kid, who didn't send me a ball when he was alive. But in the aftermath of his passing, I sit here with this J.R. Richard ball, which I keep encased on a shelf, and I value as much as any baseball memorabilia I've ever had. That is a wrap for this episode of the Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman. Please leave a comment below on what stories you'd like to hear. I really read them, I swear. Or if there's a sports figure you'd like to learn more about. Please make sure you like and subscribe and follow me on TikTok at Jeff Pearlman Author and on Bluesky at Jeff Pearlman. Thank you so much for diving in behind the scenes and digging into the story. We will see you next time on Press Box Chronicles.